Preston Hayle's lawyers had been looking for that file for 6 months. They'd hired 3 separate forensic accounting firms. They'd subpoenaed 2 former CFOs. They'd spent $4.3 million in legal fees trying to make a tax fraud case disappear, a case that, if it surfaced, would unwind a $3.1 billion acquisition and put Preston personally in front of a federal grand jury. The file existed. They just couldn't find it. It was in a brown cloth folder in the back of a kitchen cabinet, on the top shelf, behind a box of Juno's instant oatmeal and a rarely used bread maker. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on South Wabash Avenue in Chicago. The man who lived there was named Marcus Webb. He was 43 years old, a single father, and his name badge at Hayle Capital's downtown headquarters said nothing beyond the word custodial. He had been their head of corporate law for 14 years. Preston Hayle had laughed when Marcus walked through the lobby on his first day as a custodian. Actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound, and said to the man beside him, "I'll give him 3 days before he quits." That was 8 months ago. Marcus had not quit. He mopped the same floors he once walked in a $3,400 suit, filed the same documents he once drafted, and waited. 6 months after Preston's lawyers started looking, Marcus Webb walked into the federal prosecutor's office on South Dearborn Street with a brown cloth folder under his arm and a custody agreement for his daughter Zoe in his breast pocket, because he had learned, in 14 years of corporate law, that the best time to move is when the other side is exhausted and certain they've already won. Stay with this, because the man pushing the mop was the one who had built the company they were trying to protect, and the file they couldn't find had been sitting above the oatmeal the whole time. Marcus Webb lived on the 4th floor of a building on South Wabash Avenue that had, in a previous decade, been a mid-tier hotel and had been converted to residential units, with the ambition of the conversion only partially concealed by fresh paint and new bathroom fixtures. The hallways still had the proportions of hotel corridors. The windows were larger than apartment windows usually were. The kitchen had a counter that ran the full length of one wall, which Marcus used as a workspace, a homework surface, and on Sunday mornings, the staging area for the elaborate breakfast protocols that he and his daughter Zoe had been developing since she was 5. Zoe was 11 now. She was precise in the way of children who have grown up in organized households. She kept her backpack in the same spot every day, her shoes aligned in the closet, her library books stacked by due date. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's way of going very still when she was thinking hard about something, which made her look, at 11, like someone considerably older and considerably more patient. She had 2 interests that occupied most of her attention outside of school: competitive chess, which she played in a Saturday league at the Harold Washington Library, and true crime podcasts, which she listened to while doing homework in a way that her father found both impressive and slightly alarming. She had one habit that Marcus had never discouraged. Every morning, before school, she asked him one question about whatever case she'd been listening to the night before. Not a casual question, a specific, prosecutorial question, the kind that identified the weakest point in the argument. He answered every one. He had, by her estimation, never answered incorrectly. The brown cloth folder was on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet because Marcus had put it there in the first week after his termination, when he had understood immediately that the termination was not a standard severance situation, and that the people who had terminated him would eventually want to know what he knew and where he'd kept it. The top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, behind the instant oatmeal and the bread maker, both of which were props, neither of which he used regularly, was not a clever hiding place in the thriller movie sense. It was a practical one. The only people who ever came to his apartment were Zoe's friends, his neighbor Mrs. Okafor, and occasionally Zoe's mother during custody transitions. None of them had any reason to look behind a bread maker. The folder contained a single document, a 47-page internal memorandum dated October 2009, drafted by Marcus Webb in his capacity as head of corporate law for Hayle Capital, detailing the mechanism by which Hayle had structured a series of offshore subsidiary transactions to shelter $340 million in taxable income between 2006 and 2009. The memo had been written at Preston Hayle's explicit request, as a risk assessment, a document outlining the legal exposure of the structure. Marcus had written it, he had warned, in language that was careful and precise and impossible to misread. that the structure as implemented would not survive IRS scrutiny and constituted, in his professional judgment, tax fraud. Preston had read it. He had thanked Marcus for his thoroughness. He had told him to shred the original and delete the electronic file. He had said this in a meeting with 2 other people present, which was the first mistake Preston made. The second mistake was assuming Marcus had complied. Marcus had not complied. He had printed a second copy on his personal printer the same evening, put it in the brown cloth folder, written Hayle 2009 on the front in the same black marker he used for Zoe's lunch bags, and taken it home. He had said nothing about this to anyone. Not to his wife, who was still his wife at the time, not to his colleagues, 2 of whom were present at the meeting, and both of whom had since left the company under circumstances that Marcus understood better than either of them did. Not to a single person. He had simply continued doing his job, for 4 more years, with the folder on the shelf behind the bread maker. The termination came in 2013. Not abruptly. Preston Hayle did not do abrupt things, which was one of the qualities that had made him successful and one of the qualities that made him dangerous. The termination came as a reorganization, which was announced in February and implemented in April, and which restructured Hayle Capital's legal function by outsourcing it to a firm called Meridian Legal Partners, which Preston had been quietly building a relationship with for 2 years. Marcus was offered a transition role. 6 months, generous severance, a reference letter that used the phrase instrumental in the company's growth twice in 3 paragraphs. He accepted the transition role, completed it, and left in October 2013 with a cardboard box of personal items, the reference letter, and the knowledge that the reorganization had nothing to do with legal efficiency. It had been a removal. Clean, professional, deniable, but a removal. He had understood why. In the 4 years since the 2009 memo, Hayle Capital had completed the acquisition of Vantage Industrial for $3.1 billion, the largest deal in the company's history, announced in late 2012, closed in early 2013. Marcus had been present for the due diligence. He had been present for the negotiations. He had been the attorney who reviewed and flagged, in an internal memo that was subsequently marked confidential and routed only to Preston, that the offshore structure created in 2006 had become materially relevant to the Vantage acquisition regulatory filings, and that if the IRS had developed any interest in Hayle's offshore activity between 2006 and 2009, the Vantage deal could be unwound. The memo had been dated March 2013. His termination had been announced in April 2013. Marcus had not been surprised. What had surprised him, mildly, was the offer that came in March 2014, 5 months after his departure. An intermediary, a man named Gerald, who had done peripheral work for Hayle Capital for years, and who Marcus recognized as someone Preston trusted to handle conversations that Preston himself should not be seen having, called Marcus on his cell phone and said that certain parties were interested in ensuring that Marcus's transition had been financially satisfactory, and that if there were any remaining concerns about the documentation of his departure, any outstanding materials that he might still have from his time at the company, there were people who could assist in ensuring those were properly handled. Marcus had said, "Tell Preston the first, don't have anything." Gerald had said he would relay that. Marcus had hung up and considered his position. He was 41 years old. He had been out of practice for 5 months. He had a daughter who was 8. He had a divorce that was finalizing. He had a reference letter that described him as instrumental in the company's growth, and a resume that had a gap in it where the last 4 years should have been, because the circumstances of his departure had made it professionally unwise to describe his actual function in the final years of his tenure. He had, in other words, been managed out of the one position from which he could have caused problems, in a way that left him professionally diminished and financially dependent on the severance that would end in 6 months. It was, he thought, very well done. He spent 3 months in a position at a mid-sized Chicago law firm, doing contract review work that was far below his capability but that paid adequately. He left when the work dried up. He took 2 consulting contracts. He applied for 3 positions at larger firms and received polite rejections that he understood, in the specific way of someone who has been on both sides of a hiring decision, were the result of quiet calls from people who had been asked to make quiet calls. In January 2015, Preston Hayle acquired the contract cleaning services company that held the janitorial services agreement for Hayle Capital's downtown headquarters, The acquisition had been framed publicly as a vertical integration play. Marcus had read the press release and understood that it was also an opportunity to staff the building's custodial team with people who could be trusted to notice things. He had applied for the position himself, not because he had run out of options. He had one option remaining, and it was the folder, and he had not yet decided he was ready to use it, but because the position gave him proximity, and proximity gave him information, and information, in Marcus's experience, was always the thing that determined how a situation ultimately resolved. Preston Hayle had laughed when Marcus walked through the lobby on his first Monday morning. Actually laughed. Marcus had mopped the floor of the lobby and noted, with the attention of someone who had spent 14 years reading rooms, that Preston's laugh was shorter than it used to be. The thing about working the custodial shift at Hayle Capital's downtown headquarters was that nobody looked at you. This was not particular to Hayle Capital. It was true of custodial staff in corporate environments generally, and Marcus had understood it intellectually before he took the job. What he had not fully anticipated was how complete the invisibility was. Not rudeness. Exactly. Some of the junior analysts said good morning. The receptionist on the 14th floor knew his name. But the senior people, the partners, the people who had sat across conference tables from Marcus Webb, the attorney, for a decade, walked past him without recognition. Not deliberate non-recognition. Genuine non-recognition. The uniform, the cart, the context. They had rewritten him. He had decided, in the first week, that this was useful. He worked the overnight shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. This gave him access to the entire building during the hours when nobody was present except security, and security's job was to watch the entrances, not the interior. He moved through the building the way he had always moved through it, with the precise, economical attention of someone who knows which rooms matter, and why, except that now he was pushing a cart instead of carrying a briefcase, and nobody was watching him do it. He had not, in 8 months of custodial work, removed a single document from the building. He had not photographed anything. He had not taken anything that wasn't his. What he had done was read. Documents left on desks. Printouts in recycling bins. Whiteboards not erased before the cleaning crew arrived. The material reality of a company's anxieties is visible, if you know how to look, in the things people forget to put away before they go home. What Marcus read, over 8 months of overnight shifts, was the shape of a problem. The IRS had opened an inquiry into Hayle Capital's offshore activity in 2021. The inquiry had been managed, initially, by Meridian Legal Partners, the same firm that had replaced Marcus in 2013. Meridian had managed it competently for 2 years, and then in early 2023, the inquiry had escalated from an administrative review to a formal investigation, and at that point the problem had become too large for Meridian to manage alone. Preston had brought in a second firm, and then a third. The whiteboard in the 14th floor conference room, which was never fully erased because the cleaning crew arrived at 11 p.m. and someone was always working late, had shown Marcus, over the course of 6 weeks, the complete architecture of a legal strategy designed to locate and neutralize any documentation that supported the IRS's theory of the case. The theory of the case was the 2009 memo. They didn't have it, but they knew it existed. Marcus had read this on a Tuesday night in November, standing in the 14th floor conference room with a dry erase marker in his hand and a cart of cleaning supplies beside him. He had read it completely. He had erased the whiteboard. He had finished his shift. He had driven home, made coffee, looked at the brown cloth folder on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, and called his attorney, not his former colleagues, not a journalist, his attorney, a woman named Patricia Soames, who practiced federal criminal defense and who had, in a previous life, worked as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois. He had retained her 2 years earlier, quietly, paying her monthly retainer from savings, because he had understood since 2013 that at some point he would need someone who had been on the other side of this kind of case. "The investigation is live," he told her. "They're looking for the 2009 memo. I have it." Patricia said, "How long have you had it?" "Since October 2009, he said. There was a silence. "Marcus," she said, "what exactly do you do for work right now?" "Custodial," he said. "Overnight shift." Another silence. "At Hayle Capital," he said. Patricia Soames had practiced federal criminal defense for 19 years. She had seen in those 19 years a considerable range of situations, including several that had required significant recalibration of her initial assessment. She recalibrated now. "Walk me through the memo," she said. He walked her through it. Not from memory. He had the folder in front of him, the document open on the kitchen table, Zoe asleep in the next room. He walked her through all 47 pages. The structure of the offshore subsidiaries, the mechanism of the income sheltering, the specific transactions between 2006 and 2009, the figures, the entities, the decision points at which the structure had moved from aggressive tax planning into territory that Marcus had identified, in his professional judgment, as fraudulent. He also walked her through the meeting, the one in which Preston had told him to shred the original and delete the electronic file with 2 other people present. Patricia said, "Who were the other 2 people?" He gave her the names. "One of them left Hayle in 2015, he said. "The other is still there. Senior VP, Corporate Development. Are they in the memo?" "They're not in the memo. They're witnesses to the instruction to destroy the memo." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "The electronic file," she said. "The one Preston told you to delete." "I deleted it from the company server," he said. "And your personal copies." "The document in front of me," he said. "1 copy, printed the evening of the meeting, taken home the same night. No cloud backup, no email trail, nothing sent to a personal account?" "No," he said. "1 copy, in a brown cloth folder on my kitchen shelf for 14 years. Patricia said, "Why didn't you use it sooner?" It was a fair question. He had thought about it, not constantly, not with the weight of a haunting, but in the specific way that a long strategic calculation occupies a portion of attention without consuming it. The answer was not simple. "Because in 2013 using it would have been retaliation," he said. "I had just been terminated. The story would have been disgruntled former employee. The document's credibility depends on the circumstances under which it's produced. If I produce it now, when the IRS has an active investigation, when Preston's team has been looking for it for 6 months, when I can demonstrate that I've been in that building for 8 months as a custodian without taking anything or copying anything or approaching anyone, the circumstances are different." A pause. "You planned this," Patricia said. "I planned the timing," he said. "The document is what it is. I just needed to produce it at the moment when its weight was greatest." Patricia said, "You've been waiting in that building for 8 months." "Yes," he said. "Pushing a mop and reading whiteboards," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," she said, "what do you want out of this?" He looked at the custody agreement on the corner of the table. Zoe's schedule. Weeks with him, weeks with her mother. The handoff logistics that had structured his calendar for 3 years. "Zoe's college," he said, "and my bar license back in good standing." He paused. "And I want the record to show that I told them what the structure was in 2009, and they told me to destroy the document. I want that on record." "The money," Patricia said carefully. "You understand there are whistleblower provisions." "I know the provisions," he said. "I wrote the internal compliance framework that was supposed to implement them, before it was replaced with something more convenient." Another silence. "Okay," Patricia said. "Here's what we do." What Patricia needed, before she could approach the federal prosecutor's office, was a complete picture of Marcus's evidentiary position, not just the memo, but the full chain of what he knew, when he had known it, and how the document had been in his possession for 14 years without being used as leverage. This last point was critical. The defense that Preston's team would mount, when the memo surfaced, would center on the argument that Marcus had held the document as insurance, that its 14-year retention was evidence of bad faith, an attempt to weaponize privileged information for personal gain. Patricia needed to be able to demonstrate the opposite, that Marcus had retained the document in the good faith belief that it constituted material evidence of a crime, that he had not used it for personal gain, and that he had chosen this moment to produce it because the IRS investigation made its relevance undeniable. This was, Marcus explained to her over 3 sessions at her office on Michigan Avenue, a story that could only be told in full if the listener understood the architecture of Hayle Capital's legal function between 2006 and 2013, a function that Marcus had built. He had joined Hayle Capital in 1999, When the firm was a mid-sized private equity operation with 11 portfolio companies and a legal department that consisted of 2 outside counsel relationships and a part-time compliance officer, he had been hired as associate general counsel. In 2003, he had become general counsel. In 2006, when Preston had begun the offshore structuring that would produce the 2009 memo, Marcus had been the architect of the internal compliance framework that was supposed to govern those structures. A framework that included mandatory risk assessment memos for any transaction above $50 million, mandatory sign-off from outside counsel on tax structures, and a document retention policy that required all legal opinions to be kept for a minimum of 10 years. The 2009 memo had been produced under that framework. Marcus had written it because his own policy required him to. The framework had been quietly revised in 2011. The mandatory risk assessment threshold had been raised from $50 million to $250 million. The document retention requirement for legal opinions had been reduced from 10 years to 7. The outside counsel sign-off requirement for tax structures had been replaced with an internal review process, a review process that reported to the CFO rather than to Marcus. Marcus had objected to each of these changes, in writing, to Preston directly. He had 3 emails documenting those objections, printed and kept in the same. Patricia read the emails. She read them twice. "He systematically dismantled the oversight structure you built," she said. "Over about 18 months, Marcus said, each change individually defensible. Together, they eliminated every mechanism that would have required documenting what was happening, and you kept the original memo because your original policy required you to." "My original policy required 10-year retention," he said. "It's been 14. I'm compliant." Patricia looked at him. "You're going to be an extraordinary witness," she said. "I've given a lot of depositions," he said. "I know what makes a good one," she said. "What makes a good one?" "Precision," he said. "And the ability to explain why you did exactly what you did at exactly the time you did it, without hedging and without embellishment," she said. "Can you do that?" he said. "I wrote the policy. I followed the policy. My former employer dismantled the policy and then terminated the person who had written it. That's the narrative. It's simple because it's true." The senior VP of corporate development, whose name Marcus had given Patricia, was a man named Douglas Firth. He was 51 years old, had been at Hayle Capital for 16 years, and had been present at the October 2009 meeting in which Preston had instructed Marcus to destroy the document. Douglas Firth had not left the company in 2015, like the other witness. He had stayed. He had been promoted twice since 20. He was currently earning $1.4 million annually in salary and bonus, and held equity in 4 of Hayle Capital's current portfolio companies. He had also, Patricia discovered through careful research, been present at a subsequent meeting in late 2013, a meeting that had not involved Marcus, because Marcus had already been managed out, in which Preston's team had assessed the legal risk of the offshore structure and determined that the primary exposure was documentation. The minutes of that meeting, which were not marked privileged because they had been drafted by an administrative assistant rather than counsel, showed that Douglas Firth had specifically confirmed, when asked, that he was not aware of any written risk assessment related to the 2006 to 2009 offshore transactions. He had been present when Marcus was instructed to write one. He had been present when Preston told Marcus to destroy it. He had then confirmed in a documented meeting that no such document existed. Patricia put the minutes on the table in her office. "He lied," she said. "He said he wasn't aware of any written risk assessment," Marcus said. "That's technically." "Don't," Patricia said. Marcus stopped. "He lied," she said again, "in a documented meeting, while being paid $1.4 million a year to be the person in those meetings who was supposed to know what documents existed." "Yes," Marcus said. "And the other witness, the one who left in 2015, her name is Karen Yee. She left to start her own fund. She's been successful. Has anyone contacted her?" "Not that I know of," Marcus said. "But Patricia, Karen Yee didn't lie. She left. There's a difference. Do you know why she left?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "that Karen understood what the situation was and made a different decision than I did about what to do about it. She left. I stayed. Then I was removed. She's been building her fund for 8 years without looking back. I don't think Karen needs to be in this story if she doesn't need to be." Patricia looked at him. "You're protecting her," she said. "I'm making an assessment," he said. "She's not the problem. The problem is the man who told me to shred the document, and the man who subsequently confirmed under inquiry that no such document existed." Patricia said, "What do you want to happen to Douglas Firth?" Marcus thought about this. He thought about Douglas Firth at the 2009 meeting, saying nothing. He thought about Douglas Firth at the 2013 meeting, saying the document didn't exist. He thought about Douglas Firth collecting $1.4 million a year for 16 years while Marcus mopped floors and filed documents in the same building he had once run the legal function of. "I want the record to show what happened in both meetings," he said. "What he does with that is between him and his attorney." He said it without heat. It was simply the correct answer. And Marcus Webb's relationship with correct answers was very old and very settled. What Douglas Firth would do with it, Marcus would find out later, was cooperate, completely and quickly, within 72 hours of being contacted by the federal prosecutor's office, in a way that suggested he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and was, in some specific sense that Marcus could recognize without condoning, relieved. Patricia Soames walked into the federal prosecutor's office on South Dearborn Street on a Thursday morning in January with Marcus Webb beside her and a brown cloth folder under Marcus's arm. The prosecutor assigned to the Hayle Capital investigation was a woman named Rachel Thorne, 44, who had been working the case for 2 years and who had, in those 2 years, assembled everything except the one document that would make the difference between an investigation and an indictment. She had subpoenaed records. She had deposed former employees. She had worked with IRS forensic accountants who had reconstructed the offshore transaction flow from the outside. She had the shape of the crime. She did not have the internal acknowledgement that the crime had been recognized as a crime at the time it was committed. Without that acknowledgement, Preston's defense team would argue aggressive but legal tax planning. With it, they couldn't. Rachel Thorne had been told, by someone in her office who had worked an adjacent investigation, that a man named Marcus Webb had been Hayle Capital's head of corporate law until 2013. She had tried to locate Marcus Webb 3 months earlier through a standard search and had found a corporate attorney with that name whose last known employment was listed as Hayle Capital's transition period in 2013, with no subsequent employment of record. She had sent a letter to his last known address. The letter had not reached him because he had moved in 2014. She had not found him because she had been looking for a corporate attorney, and he was, at the time of her search, employed as a custodian at the same company she was investigating on the overnight shift, pushing a cart through the building from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She said this, when he sat down across from her, with an expression that Marcus recognized from 14 years of conference room negotiations, the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation while maintaining professional composure. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I tried to find you." "I know," he said. "I read the whiteboard." She looked at him. "The 14th floor conference room," he said. "November. Your case number was on the board." She absorbed this. "You've been in the building," she said. 8 months, he said. "Overnight custodial, at Hayle Capital." "Yes." She looked at the brown cloth folder. "Is that?" "The October 2009 internal memorandum," he said. 47 pages. "I drafted it. I've had it since the evening it was completed. I also have 3 emails documenting my objections to the subsequent policy changes that eliminated the oversight framework, changes that were made in my assessment, specifically to prevent this kind of documentation from existing in the future." Rachel Thorne looked at the folder for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Webb, why are you bringing this to me now?" He had expected this question. He had prepared an answer, but the answer he gave was not the prepared one. It was shorter and more accurate. "Because my daughter has a chess tournament next Saturday," he said, "and I would like to be able to tell her before then that I did what I should have done." Rachel Thorne looked at him. Then she looked at Patricia. Then she reached across the table and took the brown cloth folder. The whistleblower provision of the False Claims Act entitled Marcus to a percentage of any government recovery resulting from his disclosure. The government's assessment of the recoverable tax liability, interest, and penalties in the Hayle capital case came to $847 million. The applicable whistleblower percentage on a case of this nature ran between 15 and 30%. Patricia called Marcus on a Thursday evening, 4 months after the initial meeting, with the preliminary figure. He was in the kitchen helping Zoe with a chess problem, a specific endgame configuration she had been working on for 2 days, when the call came in. He stepped into the hallway. Patricia said the number. Marcus said, "That's the preliminary figure." "Yes," she said. "The final determination will take how long? 6 to 18 months. But Marcus, the range on the final number." "I heard you," he said. He went back into the kitchen. Zoe looked up from the chessboard. "Who was that?" she said. "My attorney," he said. "About the case?" He sat down across from her. "Yes," he said. She studied his face with the particular attention she brought to chess positions, looking for the thing that wasn't obvious. "Good news," she said. "Very good news," he said. She nodded once, the way she nodded when she had confirmed a hypothesis. Then she looked back at the board. "Okay," she said. "Help me with this endgame." He looked at the board. He saw the solution immediately. He had always been able to see 2 moves further than the apparent position suggested, but he did not say so. He let her work toward it, offering questions rather than answers, because the point was not the solution. The point was her understanding it. Preston Hayle was 58 years old when the indictment was unsealed. He had known it was coming for 6 weeks. His legal team had been in contact with the prosecutor's office, and the process had followed the trajectory that these processes follow when the government has what it needs. He had spent those 6 weeks in the specific limbo of a man who has been powerful for a long time and is in the process of understanding what that power was actually built on. The indictment named Preston Hayle personally, charged with tax fraud, conspiracy to commit tax fraud, and obstruction. The obstruction charge, stemming from the 2009 instruction to destroy the document, documented by 2 witnesses, one of whom had cooperated and one of whom was about to testify. Douglas Firth had already entered a cooperation agreement. His testimony, combined with the memo, established the sequence with a clarity that Preston's defense team described. In a call with Preston that was not intended to be overheard but was, as not favorable. The confrontation between Marcus and Preston did not happen in a courtroom. It happened in a corridor, the main corridor of Hayle Capital's downtown headquarters, on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 weeks after the indictment was unsealed. Marcus was on his shift. He was pushing the cart past the elevator bank when the elevator opened and Preston walked out. Preston had aged, visibly in the past 6 months. Not dramatically, he was still the same composed, tailored figure he had always been. But there was something in his posture that Marcus recognized from the depositions of men who have been told, finally, what the cost of something is going to be. They looked at each other. Marcus stopped pushing the cart. Preston said, "I didn't think you'd still be here." "I'm on shift until 6, Marcus said. A pause. "The memo," Preston said. "You kept it." "I was required to," Marcus said, "under the document retention policy, the one I wrote." Preston looked at him. "The policy I wrote said 10 years, Marcus said. "It's been 14. I was in compliance." Something moved across Preston's face, not quite recognition, not quite regret. The expression of a man understanding, very late, the specific nature of the thing that had undone him. "I should have handled your departure differently," Preston said. Marcus considered this. "You should have listened to the memo," he said. He said it without anger. It was again, simply accurate. The memo had told Preston what the structure was. It had told him what the risk was. It had told him, in language that was careful and specific and unambiguous, what would happen if the structure were ever scrutinized. Preston had read it, thanked Marcus for his thoroughness, and told him to destroy it. 14 years. 3 forensic accounting firms, $4.3 million in legal fees, a custodial shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the building he had once walked in a $3,400 suit. "Yes," Preston said. "I should have." The elevator arrived. Preston got in. Marcus pushed the cart down the corridor. He finished his shift at 6 a.m. He drove home. Zoe was already up, eating cereal and listening to a true crime podcast, her chessboard set up on the kitchen table for the problem she had been working on since the previous evening. "How was it?" she said. "Quiet," he said. She looked at him. "Okay, quiet or actually quiet?" she said. He looked at her, dark eyes, her mother's stillness, the chessboard between them. "Actually quiet," he said. She nodded. She went back to the chess problem. The final whistleblower determination came 14 months after the initial filing. The government's recovery in the Hayle capital case, tax liability, interest, civil penalties, and forfeiture totaled $1.2 billion. The whistleblower award, calculated at the lower end of the statutory range in recognition of Marcus's 8 months of access to the company during the investigation period, came to $147